thanks so much for coming. We're so many humans in one room. It's very exciting. And thank you to everyone online as well. I think there's a couple of hundred people online watching. So this is a good streaming evening. Yeah, so wave everyone to your friends and family at home. I'm Charlie Wells. I'm the founder, CEO of HelloSelf. So thank you so much for coming. I remember when these little CPD sessions were like 5 or 6 people in a room a couple of years ago, and now there's several hundred people online. So it's really exciting and fills me with great energy. So I've got the pleasure of introducing Julia today, which is what you're all here to see. But before I do that, I wanted to kind of give you a tiny bit of news about what's going on at HelloSelf. So this is an exciting time because we're literally right in the middle of launching our therapist community services and tools. So you should hear a lot and see a lot more community functions coming onto the HelloSelf platform. So why are we building a community? Well, you guys are an awesome network of amazing psychologists and therapists and psychotherapists. And what we want to do is make sure that you can have all of the tools in order to create the community to help every self better in the UK. And we think there are 3 big pillars to our HelloSelf community. One, we want to help you guys learn from each other, right? We want to spread knowledge, spread support. That's why we have these CPD sessions. It's why we share all of this content. It's why we provide it all online. We want to get the best knowledge out throughout the therapist community. Number 2, we really, really, really want you guys to support each other. So we've already got features where people can meet peer supervisors through the platform. We want to start supporting how that can work. We have the clinical excellence team. Anyone use the clinical excellence team? Yes, of course we all have. You should. They're brilliant. There's we've got 10 people on the panel already. This clinical panel you can book into whenever you need. This is all about giving you the support and the structures that you might need to do your excellent work. And then the third, and possibly the most important part of a community, is connection, right? We want you to be able to connect with each other so that you can find people that you can work with, you can find people you can send referrals to, you can trust, you can learn from, all of these different things. So there's lots more connection functions. Has anyone seen the new profiles that went live this week? Yes, they're brilliant, thank you. So we launched brand new profiles on the thing where you can connect with each other, almost like a sort of LinkedIn profile for therapists. And so we want to really create these communities of trust on the platform. And sneak peek into the future, we've got kind of 2 new community features coming down the line. The first is we're going to start allowing you guys to kind of connect with medics, so GPs and psychiatrists who want to connect and refer to you and work with you for a better connected care outcome. We have seen people get better outcomes when people connect their kind of caregivers in their system. So we're trying to work out how do we deliver that to better outcomes for everyone. And then even slightly further down the line, we're trying to work out how can we create longer lasting connections with your clients, your members. How do we actually do prevention? So how do we stop relapse? Like, it is possible, we believe, to bring relapse rates down to tiny percentage rates rather than 40s and 50%. That is the way that we can make every self better. That's the way we can really change the mental health landscape. So we're going to build more features to allow you to connect with other care providers, every medical experts, and features where you can kind of help understand how you can keep members well for a long, 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 long time. That's how we make every self better. And that's how we create an amazing family of clinicians across the UK and further abroad as we go more global. You see what I did there? I started talking about family. Perfect bridge. So I'm really delighted to introduce Julia today. So Julia and I met actually at a conference in Oxford a few months ago, and I started looking into her work. Obviously, she's super well known for her book. I'm plugging it for you. So you can get a copy over there. Everyone online, you have to buy it on Amazon. And obviously, Julia's coming here to talk about multi- and intergenerational psychological wellness. And probably some stuff from her book, which is Every Family Has a Story. So if you put a warm hand together, and I'll hand over to Julia for a great talk this evening. Oh, sorry. I was meant to make one last announcement. Julia's going to take Q&A afterwards, so if you're online, if you write your questions into the box during the speech, at the end of it, we will take questions and put them to the audience, but you'll be able to read them out. So please add questions throughout on chat. For all of you guys here in the room, save them to the end.
Hello, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here. A little bit intimidated, this idea of 200 or 300 people online. It reminds me of when I was at Paddington Green doing my master's, and I was in a clinical room watching disturbed families where they couldn't see us from behind the screen. And I feel like all of you online are like behind the screen watching me, and you can write, "She's useless." But I am going to talk about my book. But really what I like is interaction and knowing what you want. So, I mean, if you have a question while I'm talking, jot it down, and then we're going to have a lot of time for discussion and interaction at the end, because I think that's where we really learn the most. What I imagine is that from what I say, a lot of it you will know already, so it will confirm that you're on the same page as me, which will be nice for me and I hope useful for you. But a lot of you might not agree with what I say. And actually, I think that's where the real learning is, that if there's something that comes up that you feel very strongly about, either that you disagree or you vehemently agree, really notice that for yourselves, because it'll come up as a therapist. But also, let's talk about it when we have the kind of discussion. And any kind of questions or things that come up for you or remind you of your own family, because one of my kind of ways of working is that I think what is most personal is most universal. I'm a Rogerian therapist. And so one of the reasons I wrote the books is I felt that all the kind of learning and wisdom that us therapists have the kind of privilege to learn from our clients stays behind the privacy and the confidentiality of the therapy walls. And I really wanted to find a way to take what I've learned from all my clients out into the world. And I mean, I hope I've done a bit of it, and I hope you all will too. But I also think that clients come to teach us. You know, where I struggle most with clients is when it's sort of pushing on my own things. And that is why I wrote Every Family Has a Story, because I, like all of you, come from a family that I spent huge tracts of time looking at, discussing, crying, hitting, hating, loving in my own therapy. And one of the main reasons I wrote the book was I think that societally we've spent much too much time kind of focusing on the individual and on parenting, and not enough on the whole family and the kind of matrix of family and the transgenerational patterns in family. And I think we miss out a lot on what we can gain from them, but also by focusing on the individual, it's like we have to work it out alone. And I think very much like Charlie was saying in Hello Self, we're not wired to be alone, we're wired to be connected. And our family is, of course, the first place where we're wired, where we learn all our relational stuff. And I think we thrive when we come from good, strong relationships. And I guess when I'm talking about family, the family I'm talking about is our biological family where we've come from, or it can be the family that we choose and that we make. I'm going to sit down. Does that make any difference? Can you all see me? I just can't stand up holding a mic for that long. And I don't know about all of you, but so I've been a therapist for about 33 years. I worked for 25 years in the NHS. So there I worked with families who had a child or a baby died. And I did that for 25 years. And then they took my room away. And I thought, it took me 10 years to get a room with a window that wasn't a cupboard. I finally got a room with a window and my own door. And I really felt like I'd been given an Oscar. And I was so happy. And I had that for about 14 years. And then they moved me down to a passage which had all the medical equipment in it, that had trolleys going up and down, and babies crying in the room next door when I was working with families who'd had babies that died or children that died. And I thought, no. So I've been working in private practice. But wherever I've worked, whether it was at St. Mary's or whether in private practice, there isn't a person who has walked through my door that hasn't talked about their family. The family they came from, the family that they're making. Because our families are the bedrock of our lives when they function good enough, in the Winnicott term, that they are the people we celebrate with, the people we can turn to, the people that we can kind of, like when times now, when I think everyone, whatever your background or belief system, is feeling in a heightened state, you want to be able to go back to the safety of your family, where you can be most yourself, where you can feel safe around your kitchen table. But families also, of course, are the place that many of us suffer most too. Because where you love most, you hate most, and you feel most. And so I think we've really missed a trick when we don't look at family systems and we don't look at patterns in families. And I think, I don't know, do say stuff if you want to ask, by the way. But from my perspective, I think we've completely underestimated the influence of one generation to the next and how that influence, the stresses, the unprocessed stresses from the past, intensify and add stress to the generation that we're in the present. And that often we don't know what it is. And so we're sort of saying to ourselves, what's wrong with me? Why am I making so much fuss? Why am I so anxious? And it is often not anything to do with us. And that we can look up and look at what happened in the past that hasn't been talked about, hasn't been discussed, and hasn't been revealed. And I think one of the things that I think most of us therapists agree is really what we spend a huge amount of energy hiding from ourselves and others is the thing that haunts us and is the thing that does us harm over time. I will talk more about that. But the other kind of thing as a premise in families is that families are always changing. They are in constant flux. And I think we don't fully realize how much flux and change families have to deal with, in that it could be a grandparent getting older, having to downsize or go into a care home. It could be that your children are becoming teenagers. It could be that the parents are divorcing or separating. It could be that your children are getting married and bringing new people into the family or having grandchildren. So your families are constantly changing and evolving. And the families that have the capacity to manage change, that are adaptive, are the families that thrive. The families that are very rigid and individuals that are very rigid are the ones that have much more difficulty in their outcomes. So if you look at all the research about well-being, you'll see that those that have loving relationships are the ones that live longer, are healthier, wealthier, have less pain. And one of the kind of indicators of having those good relationships is being adaptive. We are wired to change, but I think particularly in the 21st century, and maybe Charlie will have something to say about this, about technology, we're so used to kind of pressing a button and things operating that we want to have much more control, I think, than generations before us ever expected to have. And that need to have control is the thing that blocks the capacity to have change. Because in the message that runs all through all three of my books is that pain is the agent of change, that all families are imperfect, and families move on a spectrum of functional and dysfunctional, depending on what's going on. And it's depending on the external stresses and the internal stresses. So when both of those things are happening at the same time, that's a very tight little window to be adaptive. That's a very tight window to be generous and kind to others. So it's useful to kind of recognize within yourself and try and take note, what is going on outside? Am I starting my menopause? What phase am I in my life? To know what's going on internally and to see how much emotional bandwidth you have. And if you don't have that much, be kind to yourself. Kind of go a bit more gently. Be self-compassionate. I know you know all this, but I thought I'd say it anyway. That all our relational stuff we get from our families. So obviously our attachment style. I think, by the way, attachment style isn't fixed like secure or insecure or avoidant or anxious. I think we can have traits of it with different people. So I think, with your mum, you may have an anxious attachment, but actually with other people, you could have quite a secure attachment. So I think it's a bit too rigid. But to think, when we're thinking with our clients and working with them, and what I was thinking about when I was working this book and with the clients I was working with in this book, about how that relational stuff is so hardwired in us from so young, and that it's the template that we carry into every relationship, into our love relationships, our work relationships, our family relationships, our love relationships. And that template may be slightly adapted and changed within those, but that we really need to understand our own template better, I think, because that, as therapists, when we really understand what our template is, that enables us to be flexible and adaptive to attune and meet the template of the clients and the families in front of us. Does that make sense? So now I'm going to move the slide to tell you a bit about my family. So I was brought up in a family where I was surrounded by these black and white photographs. This is my mother's brother and sister. And everything that mattered was not said in my family, and nothing that mattered was talked about. And so I was always trying to figure out what was going on. I was surrounded by these black and white photographs. I didn't know who these people were until I was a teenager, when I discovered they were my mother's father, mother, sister, and brother, who had all died suddenly and traumatically by the time she was 25. So she was an orphan by the time she was 25. And my father, his brother, died in a dentist chair, and his father died of a heart attack by the time he was 27. So between them, either all of their family or half their family were dead, and they never spoke a word. I never heard any stories, any anecdotes. I didn't know their names. And so the kind of emotional environment I was brought up in was one of denial. What isn't said doesn't hurt you, isn't felt, and doesn't have to be dealt with. But of course, it's felt. It is felt. And I decided, so to kind of fast forward to when I was 28, 29, I decided I wanted to be a psychotherapist. And not surprisingly and surprisingly, the first placement that became available to me was a bereavement service, Westminster Bereavement Service. And I jumped at it. And now I look back at it, it was almost like everything that, I think for all of us therapists, everything that I needed to do for myself, I was offering to clients. I think often what we most want, we give to other people. So I wanted to hear people talking about their grief. I wanted to hear people being truthful about their emotional experiences, because in that way, that would have given me permission to have an understanding of the unvoiced stories in my family. And my mum and dad, they never, ever spoke about them. I never really heard about them. She's 90, she's dead now. But when she was about 89, I started recording her secretly, she didn't know. And I started asking her about her brother who was killed in Arnhem or her sister. And the few times she did talk about them, she was literally like that 17-year-old girl that was given the news. It was completely unprocessed. It was as if she was at Edinburgh Cookery School when someone came in and said to her, Pauline, can you please come and leave the room? She was told her brother Tony had been killed. She went back into the room. She never told anybody. She never cried. She went to see a Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movie that evening and never spoke about him again. And it makes me cry thinking about it now. I feel like the sadness for my mum. But when she told me when she was like 89, she was like that 17-year-old girl. It was completely, she had locked it away and built masses of stuff, not that healthy, I have to say, masses of defenses around it, because she didn't know how to deal with it. And what was really interesting for me as a therapist was that in writing the book, I did think about them much more. And there's this, thing in grief is that the person has died, but the love for them never dies. The relationship continues. And I felt by really thinking and connecting with my parents' story, 5, 6 years after they'd both died, I actually did grow to love them more and have more compassion for them and feel much more connected to them. And so I think something when you're thinking about working with clients when people have died is that part of it, that the relationship really does continue, and that you can ask a 50-year-old about her sister who died 15 years ago, and whether that sister would like her to buy that blue jacket or go eat goat's cheese for lunch. And she can go internally, and that sister will always be able to tell her. I mean, I saw a family of sisters today whose mothers died, 3 sisters, and I've been seeing them for a number of years, and they now have this kind of system where they use rituals to represent their mum. So they have a photograph, obviously it's on their phone, it isn't in a frame anymore, but they have a picture on their phone of their mum, and if they have a question about, should I take this job or not take this job, they turn on the phone, they look at the picture of their mum, then they close their eyes and they go internally and they can hear her voice. And so that way they keep the relationship going. And it's incredibly powerful and reparative, both because they have able to grieve her, they've felt the pain, they've cried, they've done the work. And as they've done the pain has diminished and the relationship in some way has expanded. Does that make sense? Okay. So was I going to tell you anything else about my... Well, the other thing is, in relation to you, thinking about what got you to be a therapist, is, are you kind of fully aware of all your own unmet needs, that in some way you're doing what you most needed to have, you're giving what you most needed to receive? And I think that's often really useful for us as therapists. With our different clients, are we offering what we wanted to get?
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
Ask an example? You said a bit more.
Well, I mean, my example is that I was never told the truth, and I wasn't given everything was hidden below the waterline. So, the pain they felt, what was really going on. And so when I was volunteering in a Westminster bereavement service, my first job was in Maida Vale. I went up, it was a voluntary service, and I had to go up 15 flights of stairs into this woman's room whose daughter had been killed in a lorry accident. But it was the first time I'd heard someone honestly show their pain. And I realized, although I knew nothing, this is what I wanted to do forever. Because there was something about the honesty of it and the way it cut through everything that I was hooked. Whereas I'd been brought up where everything was hidden. Everything was put on a show. Hide it. Get on with it. Be okay. I mean, I don't blame my parents at all. They were the post-war generation. They were brought up from parents who'd been in the First World War. They had no choice. They knew nothing else. So I don't blame them at all. But for me, that kind of breaking open of expressing pain was like a lightning conductor. It's like, oh my God, I didn't know you could actually say it. And there's a big spectrum of ways that we can do that. Does that answer? So where are we? Here we go. So it's more of what I was kind of talking about, is thinking about ourselves and thinking about our clients. If we take it from the lens of the individual, that it's all about me, and we turn it the lens of looking upwards, and we look at, it didn't start with you. You look at the stories that have been untold, the narratives that you haven't heard, the secrets, the lies, the confabulations, you know, how things get sort of, you know they're not quite right. And what I understand, and I'd love to know if you agree with me, so hold on to this for questions at the end too, is that what gets passed down, the pain, the unprocessed pain from one generation that gets passed down, it goes down to the next generation until someone's prepared to feel the pain. And that it comes down in many different mechanisms. So it comes down from behaviors. So in that attachment pattern that we learn, it's the behaviors that we learn around emotional stress. Do you learn to shut down? Do you learn to anesthetize? So alcohol, drugs, sex, busyness, food. Do you learn that you can speak authentically? Do you learn that emotions, you know, are not allowed? What are the rules in your family about emotions? So it gets passed down in behaviors. It also gets passed down epigenetically. And this isn't necessarily, it's not inevitable that unprocessed pain gets passed down epigenetically. It can be and it can't be, as it were, as with all things. But if it's epigenetically, it's that you're born with a heightened sense of fear. So the work, there's a lot of work from the Holocaust survivors in Israel. There was a lot of work on epigenetics in Holland after the famine. And what that showed is that the survivors of the Holocaust or the famine, they gave birth to children who had a heightened sense of fear. So they had heightened levels of cortisol and were carrying trauma that they never actually experienced. And I'm going to tell you about a case study that I work with. And so I think what I'm thinking about when you're working with clients is maybe get them to do a genogram, to look at the generations before them. And also through the genogram, you can look at patterns, you know, separation. Often babies are hidden, stillbirths, neonatal deaths, miscarriages. And ask them to, because genograms are a really good way to get information from your families that isn't threatening. You know, if you ask your mum and dad, tell me about such and such, they may just not open up. But if you do a genogram like a puzzle, like let's look at this together. This is like, what's that TV series? Where do we come from? Who do you think you are? Let's do who do you think you are. Then it becomes quite a fun thing. And then you can, when you see that, you can see the patterns in your family. So you can see what has got passed down, what is unprocessed, and what is blocked. But also to remember that love gets passed down. I think as therapists, we think a lot about pain, trauma, and we talk a lot about the ghosts from the nursery. And the thing I really want to add into our narrative is the angels from the nursery and the love that gets passed down. So to remember the antidote to the pain and the loss and the trauma is the love. It might be the love of your next door neighbor who always gave you a cake. It might be your grandmother. It might be a teacher. But also look with your clients for the love that gets passed down, the angels in their nursery. I mean, I don't know why some families have survived despite great adversity and others fragment. I think really it's about love, but I also think it's about many other things that we don't actually have control of. So one of the books that you've got, one of the chapters in the book that you've got today is an ultra-Orthodox Jewish family. So for writing the book, I'd just watched Unorthodox. Did you all see Unorthodox? So I thought, I'm married to a Jew, so I've always been interested in Jews and Jewish culture, and I loved Unorthodox. And so I put a message online to a Jewish bereavement charity asking, was any multi-generation family prepared to work with me? And the next day, I only got one reply, and I got this amazing family, and I worked with 5 generations of them. So I worked with the great-grandmother, Kati, who'd been in Auschwitz, her 63-year-old daughter, her 45-year-old daughter, her 23-year-old daughter, who had a sort of 2-year-old that was running around. And it was during COVID, so I worked with them all online. Because they were ultra-Orthodox, the men wanted to be part of it, and I wouldn't let them, because I thought, no, I want to hear the women's voices. So the men would open the computer and turn it on, which I found incredibly annoying. I know I shouldn't have been biased, but I really find that annoying. And then I'd work with the women. And I expected to see, from all the research, that there was a lot of transgenerational trauma. I thought there would be so much anxiety and unprocessed trauma between them all. That was not what I saw. Kati, this phenomenal 92-year-old woman, she had this spark and this vibrancy that shone through the screen. And she was, you know, she actually broke her hip because she'd been climbing on a ladder trying to get, I think it was some herb to make her goulash for her family during COVID. So, I mean, she never stopped. She refused to let her children go shopping for her. And they felt rather ashamed that all the community saw their 92-year-old mum on the bus carrying carrots and onions and leeks. But she had this incredible energy. And what she said was, I survived Auschwitz to marry my husband, Isaac, to love him and to have you. And what enabled her to survive, I think, was a number of things. One was her genetics. She was born with a natural kind of spark. And when she was at Auschwitz, that meant that she was given the odd biscuit. She had the odd piece of kindness that happened to her shoes that enabled her to survive. So that was just genetics. She was born into a very loving family. So she was in Auschwitz when she was 8, but she had the secure love of that kitchen table, the goulash, her siblings in her. And that sustained her and gave her hope. And she always had hope. So she was in the queue with Mengele, and her sister and her 2 sisters and her mum went to the left and she went to the right, because she'd been told on the train to say that she was older than she was. And she survived it. She survived the death march. But the thing that really enabled her to survive it was the meaning, and that was love, that she survived in order to love. What was interesting was her daughter and her granddaughter were very worried. They were always worrying. So they didn't carry trauma, but they carried worry, and they had a very complicated relationship to food. And so that did get passed down. All the family had fear about stripes. If they saw anyone in vertical stripes, they freaked out. They freaked out when they saw chimneys, and they freaked out with barking dogs. So there were particular things that freaked them out. But on the whole, they were a family that really thrived and were a very happy family. The other big thing that was a kind of learning that I didn't expect to get, which I think you could translate to many families where someone is very successful, was that Kati was a huge act to follow. So that whenever they suffered or something went wrong, they wouldn't give themselves permission to be upset about it, because they would compare it to their grandmother who had survived Auschwitz. So how can you complain about losing your job when your grandmother was in Auschwitz? And I think from a learning point of view as a therapist, we can all think about people who, you know, comparing yourselves to others is a route to utter misery. Comparing yourself to a family member who's very successful is really double misery, I think. And I think that's something that we can kind of learn from. One more thing is that, and I want to know about this when we talk at the end, is also I've worked with a lot of trauma from children dying, and it has affected me about, if my children have a headache, I think they've got a brain tumor, or, I think they're going to die. But also, with these terrible stories, I felt guilty because I had quite a lot of bad dreams, because she told me over like 4 sessions all the things that happened to her. And I sort of have watched the programs because I felt a responsibility to, but I really hate it. They always haunt me. And then I felt guilty. I don't know how you feel about it now, watching things, the terrible things that are happening in the Middle East. Like, there was a part of me that felt I needed to be haunted by it because I had a duty as a human being to kind of honor the suffering. But there was also part of me that was really haunted and didn't sleep and very disturbed and didn't like that at all. And so I'd love to talk to you about that at the end, about how we manage ourselves in our own kind of living within the own boundaries of our own life and our own well-being, and how we sustain that, and how we manage the interaction and the impact of others on us. I think we don't think about that enough. Thinking about what predicted family breakdown, I think one of the things is really bad communication. So the family that I'm thinking of here they were called the Rossi family, and there were 3 daughters who were in their 40s, and their mum, and their dad had died. They were sort of late 40s, and their dad had died 35 years before of suicide. He'd killed himself. And one of the things that I think is really interesting for us to kind of think about and talk about is protection. So they came because they were pissed off with their mum. And she was pissed off with them because she felt like, your dad killed himself. I did everything to keep you going. I had to get an extra job. I managed him dying by suicide. And now you're cross with me. She was really legitimately annoyed with them. And what I kind of came to understand was that they always talked about their dad like he was this amazing dad, like he was so special. And the eldest daughter said, I'm so pissed off with everyone saying how great dad was. He killed himself. Everyone tells me he loved us. It doesn't feel like he loved us. And that, in a way, opened them up to be able to be honest with each other. She said he was an alcoholic and then he killed himself. Great dad, that kind of thing. And the mum said to them, I never dared ask you how you felt because I didn't want to know the answer. Because I think watching our children suffer is probably one of the worst things that any of us have to tolerate. We never want to see our children suffering. We always want to be able to protect them. We always want them to be okay. So when they're really suffering, there's a way that we do this thing that we call protection, which is, if I don't talk about it, it isn't really going to hurt anybody. And then we're co-protecting. And you can think about this was in the Rossi family of suicide, but you can think about it when someone's dying of an illness, when someone's losing a job, when they're getting divorced. This idea of protection, I think, is where you get miscommunication, where you build walls of division and resentment and difficulty that then gets played out in the family for the rest of their family's lives. And it's all done intentionally for good, kind of keep you okay. And I think one of the tasks that we need to do sensitively, because we're not there with kind of boots to break people open, but I find that one of my tasks as a therapist is to help people find a way of facing the reality as it is, not the reality as they wish it was or wish it would be, but the reality as it is. Because once you know how bad it is, you can begin to deal with it. And I really think we can't fix what we don't face. And everything that we don't face kind of builds up behind us, around us, below us, and does us harm. But we may have to do it over a long time, but you don't have to do it all at once. I'm really talking a lot. Shall I stop? I'll tell you what I'll do. I've talked much more than I expected. Why don't I just do the touchstones? I'll just do this and then we'll have a conversation. Is that about right? Are you all happy? Shall I just do one more thing and then we can talk? So I put this. So the starting point for this is no perfect families. We're all on a spectrum of moving between good enough, really shit, and kind of okay. But I thought it would be useful to look at the touchstones for the well-being of family. What enables families to survive despite adversity, to not break down, to be kind of good enough. And you know all these things, but one of them is how we fight, to fight productively, that we will, where you love most, you hate most. You feel most intensely, you make your deepest mistakes. Normally that is in your family relationships, in your partner relationships, or with your children. Those days where you are literally, like I was with my son, a really bad version of yourself. And it isn't about not having those bad days and giving yourself a hard time. It's about fighting productively where you know you're going to fight, but repairing after the fight. That isn't just saying a very quick sorry. It's about finding the time, because it may take 2 or 3 days for you both to calm down enough, to be calm enough, to have a wise mind enough, to be in your hippocampus, not in your kind of fight or flight place, to think together about what was really going on. Because it very rarely is how you stack the dishwasher. It's much more likely to be about attention or love and how you can repair so that you can learn it from the fight. And also, when you learn that you can fight and be the worst version of yourself and still be loved, you feel closer, you feel stronger, and you actually then become the less worse version of yourself, if that makes sense. It's kind of paradoxical. And I don't think we have enough fun as families. I mean, I hate games, but I do think we kind of always chore-driven and getting stuff done and not enough dancing in the kitchen. I think we could do with, I did a post on Instagram today about glimmers, which is the opposite of triggers. It's the antidote to triggers, where you're kind of looking for little moments of like sunsets or dogs, or we've got a new dog, Bob, and he is my fun. He actually did knock me over and practically broke my knee last week. But so like looking for things, a bit like looking for angels in the nursery, not just the ghost. I think we need to look for joy and choose it. I think where you put your mindset as a family is where you get your outcome and where you get your returns. And I think we can get so bogged down in getting everything done and trying to be perfect, and really we should just forget the dishwasher and dance in the kitchen is kind of the mindset I'm getting to. I think we underestimate the importance of rituals, that having these rituals that mark transitions in families, that can make what's invisible very visible. I mean, the most obvious is obviously a funeral, but there are many rituals that we can create. You can have a Friday night ritual if you're a Jewish family, but you can have a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday night ritual, any kind of family, where you decide we're going to have a ritual where we're going to have a nice dinner. And I think the other thing is 5 positive. If you're kind of thinking, why is everyone pissed off with me? Check with yourself kindly and self-compassionately. Have I been 5 times more positive or 5 times more negative? And probably you've been 5 times more negative. I think we underestimate how power works in families, that sometimes you need top-down power, but often you need collaborative power. And I think we can get in a real muddle, but we don't recognize who holds the power, how you can invisibly fight for power. That can be with siblings. I think we underestimate the sibling relationships and how formative they are in that template of our secure and insecure attachment. The other thing I think is we need to model the behavior that we want. So we may say to our children, I really want you to be happy and carefree, but we're stomping around like an angry old cow all the time. So I think you need to, you need to live and be who you want your children to be, not just to want them to be something where you're showing it differently yourself. I think that's it. Have you got any questions?
I've got a microphone, so if anyone wants to ask a question in person, I could pass the mic.
And online questions. All
And
300 of you who are
too.
sticking your tongues out at me.
Anyone would like to ask a question? Could raise a hand. I'll go online then. Somebody has asked, is there research showing attachment styles are not permanent? I completely agree that you can have an insecure attachment with close family sometimes and build strong, safe attachment with those who respond to the needs more empathetically.
Does anybody? I don't know the research that shows that. I mean, none of us therapists would be therapists if we didn't think that we had neuroplasticity in our minds and that we could change. So I kind of think two things. I think on the one hand, we can't ever change and go back and kind of make everything good in the past, that we have to find a way of accommodating and live with what was difficult, and that we may be born with a default type of attachment style that will kind of come up instinctively. But I think through awareness, through therapy, through insight and knowledge, we can adapt we can have that Frankel thing of a moment between the event and the response, so then we can change our attachment style. I don't know if anyone agrees with me. Do you agree with me? Thank you. Okay.
That's it for online. Does anyone else have a question?
Charlie.
Oh, pass the mic to you, Charlie. Oh, got that.
Okay, this is about systems. So I had a brain hemorrhage 11 years ago, and when I've been working with the hospital since, and they've found that giving psychological support to the carer of someone who's had a stroke actually leads to better stroke recovery outcomes to the patient. So if you start thinking about sort of system-wide psychological interventions, how could you think about better sort of psychological wellness for families multi-generationally? Like, should we be treating everyone in a family of someone who has a mental health condition? And if so, how do we actually do that as a society today?
Easy question, Charlie. Well, I mean, I did work with whole families, and I think, funny enough, I think online is the place that you can work with whole families. I would never have been able to get all of these families in my room. And so there was something incredibly powerful. So one about, I had the great-grandmother, a different family, an Afro-Caribbean family, where the great-grandmother, where I saw up her nose a lot, and I saw her sort of lampshade. But they really, and then each other, and then the sort of teenager who was like, her head would be down like this, and then she'd look up, But I got a lot from them by working online. So I think we do want to work more with family systems. So, I mean, the Anna Freud Center, which is the sort of leading mental health charity in children's mental health, they have the Anna Freud School, because they say if you take the child and you treat the child, but you put them back into the family where all the original injuries happened. And so it's much more important if you're going to really change the outcome for that child, to have the whole family. And so the main parents come into the school with the children and do the therapy and learn with the children. So I do think it's really something that we need to be thinking about. And I don't know if people are going to think this is really bad. I've done masses of training, but I'm not a systemic therapist. But I reckon I can work with 5 or 6 people on a screen,
I think I'd like to talk about the therapeutic relationship again, and because we're all therapists here, and I'm just mindful that we probably all work slightly differently. You're a psychotherapist, some of us are more CBT driven, and so we've got different lengths of our therapeutic relationship, and yet we're forming an attachment of some sort, aren't we, with the client that we've got there, and so that's a system, and we're going to trigger lots of different family relationships depending on how they view us. And so I suppose it's seeing that as an agent of change, that the relationship that we build, but how does that fit into the kind of family work that you're doing? I suppose particularly like our role and how we fit into that.
So how are you the agent of change in a family when you're working one-to-one?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think when I work with someone one-to-one, they bring their family into the room with them, don't they?
Yeah.
And so what I would encourage them to do, for instance, is a genogram. So if they're not bringing the people in physically, I get them to think about them systemically. Is that your question?
But I think it's also about more your relationship with them. And so, you know, they might see you as a mother figure, and then they're building, because you're talking about giving them and meeting parts and their needs that they haven't had met, right, in their family system. And so just speaking to that a little bit more, that the needs that you're kind of meeting through the therapy relationship.
I mean, yes. So I think how I kind of want to form a relationship, and I saw 8 clients today, and each of them is obviously different, but it would be that I would attune and meet their particular needs. You know, I'm very person-centered in how I work, so I would meet them where they're at. And so someone came today who, when I started a sentence and she started crying, and I stopped speaking and I said, I'm aware that you're crying, you know, what's going on? And she, from just somehow the inflection in my voice, she felt I was going to say, I can't work with you anymore. And she just, because there was something obviously in it that reminded her of her mum or her dad or someone. And so I really felt it was my job then to say, I am not going to stop working with you until we've done the work that you need to do. This is co-created. It's a collaborative, reciprocal relationship. We're both in it. And I'm committed to work with you, for you, until you get enough of what you want. And she'd probably never heard that before. Maybe a lot of you would think that's too much to offer. But I mean it. Yeah. And I'm committed, so I'm in. Because I feel my clients need to feel that I have a responsibility to them, not for them. But I need to be a reliable, consistent, predictable person in their life that they can trust. Yeah. And by offering that, that's how I'm trustworthy. I don't think I've answered your question. Well, I can see her eyes are swiveling, and she's like, no, that isn't what I wanted.
Well, no, it is, but I think it speaks to, I think it's a neglected part of probably most of our NHS working, systems that we're in, to see that as a really key part of change, and it's not often...
Because you can only offer 8 sessions.
Sure, whatever it is, but also explicitly trained and talked about like how vital that is in terms of people experiencing somebody else holding a space for them that they haven't held for them
because
before.
You know that all the research shows it isn't the modality that predicts good outcomes, it's the quality of the relationship with the therapist. Yeah. So the quality of that relationship is that felt sense with the person. Yeah. So it doesn't matter if I was CBT or not, it's how they feel they can trust me.
But you also have to enact that and have the confidence to hold that. And I think the junior therapists that we see in training, like that's quite hard.
Yeah. But funny enough, I remember when I was training to be a therapist, one of my tutors said something to me that has stayed with me, which is that a young therapist sometimes brings a openness and a lack of kind of tarred, weathered old predictability to a session that is very enlightening and creates a big possibility for good relationship and change. And that us tired old kind of people, me, can sometimes go, oh, here we go. I know what you're thinking, And so I think there's something about young that is can be very positive.
Yeah, thank you.
You had a question?
Just to carry on with what you were saying and thinking about the relationship and who we are for our clients, whether that can give us an indication as to where the difficulty might be within the client who we're seeing within their family relationship. For me,
Because they'll act them out with us, definitely. 100%. Yeah, yeah. They'll project onto us, they'll transfer it onto us, or we'll be aware of something and you'll think that it doesn't feel like me, and so then I offer it back, like I'm aware, I feel shut down, or so you use what they bring to work with the relationship. Yeah.
Thank you.
Many of us who work in the NHS, there's a huge pressure to see people and to get
them out the door.
To get people off your waiting list and through. And I wondered about how do we look after ourselves? So, how do we not bring that stuff home? We do. I certainly do. Like, if I've had a busy day, I don't want to speak to anyone at home when I get home. I want to be left alone. But actually, have you got any tips through your experience of how you actually look after yourself? And obviously, we have supervision, we have a reflective space, but is there anything more we could be doing to kind of take care of ourselves?
So, I mean, I think lots of things about that. I think we can't not be affected by it because emotions are contagious. And, to go back to my earlier point, to kind of, the kind of wounded helper, we're likely to be doing this job because we're empathic, and we're empathic because things have happened to us. There will be something in our story that's influenced us to be there. I also think it's kind of recognizing, for me, the things that I do are very physical. So I have supervision, but I make sure I kickbox, which is the opposite of sitting and being calm and kind and warm. So I punch someone's lights out every week. And I've done it for well over 30 years. And so I think we need, and I've punched Damien here, who's a friend of mine. And so I think we need to kind of think of the antidotes of what we give sitting every day and listening and taking in and into our bodies and into our beings these stories. We need to, mind and body are connected. We need to do physical things that get them out of our system. We need to, people always want me to see these terrible films about death and dying. I want to watch Mamma Mia. I want to watch films with happy endings. I do not want misery streaming in front of me. I have that in my room. So I choose to do lots of things that have happy endings, that have me dancing in the kitchen, that I punch people's lights out. And as well as, God, I'll get struck off. Is that bad? I don't know. Is that bad? But it's the opposite. I just think we need to kind of put it away. And also, I do think that we can get quite grandiose as therapists, that we can think we have more responsibility and influence than we actually do. And that to recognize we're doing the best we can, we're offering this 50 minutes, we're showing up, we're being our best selves, and really it's in the gift of the client of what they take, what they can do with their lives. They have, 7 days and 23 hours to do what they want with it. And I think the more we kind of recognize it's in their gift and we can create an environment that can support them, we can take some of the kind of onus on us that, I'm carrying this huge burden, if you see what I mean. God, I'm so going to get struck off, I'm telling you.
Lady in green, here we go. If anyone's online that has a question, you can also raise a hand and you can talk into the room so we can actually hear you.
I'd love that.
Julia, as you were talking, I was thinking about some individuals that I work with, and when I do their genogram, it's huge, it's expanded. It involves kin, it involves neighbours, it involves community.
Isn't that lovely?
And they call them aunties and uncles, and they are family. But as we start to think about this expanded genogram, actually the trauma is experienced by the whole community, by the neighbourhood, and it's intergenerational. So I was wondering about your experiences of working with intergenerational community trauma, which you can see from the 1, 2, 3
Collective
people who are
trauma.
sat in front of you, impacts them so greatly.
So collective trauma, I think, is a real thing, and I think we experienced it a lot during COVID. I think rituals and naming what's going on and coming together and connecting is the best that we can do as an antidote to trauma, because trauma stays in the mind and it disconnects you from yourself and it disconnects you from others. So you go completely offline. And so the more we can bridge that sort of isolation and chilliness and build connection and warmth and coming together, I think that is, unbelievably important. Things like park runs, community. We've got a GP here, social prescriptions. I think they are incredibly important in the kind of antidote to trauma. People coming together to garden or paint. I think arts are incredibly important. I think we underestimate the curative value of art, of going to galleries, listening to music together. Choirs, I think, are incredibly powerful. When I work with families, I'm an EMDR therapist, so I work individually with EMDR. And when I work with a whole family where they're traumatized, I work with them individually, and then they go back into the family. So I thought about doing EMDR in front of each other, but I just thought it was too exposing. So I work with them one-to-one, and then we work as a collective. I think EMDR is an unbelievably powerful and actually very short-term therapy that has amazing outcomes in my experience.
Thank you.
Do we have questions online? Someone raised a hand. Oh, I'll come back around. You had a question, didn't you?
Thanks for the talk, Julia. I was wondering, sort of almost opposite to this, in terms of your work, if you work with people who are orphaned at a very young age, or adopted or surrogate, and what's the difference you notice between people who have grown up in
Biological families.
Biological family.
I think often, I think it's really changed. So I've worked with people who are in their sort of 50s and 60s who were adopted. And in the past, it was very much, you're my son. They didn't hear about their biological birth family. They were it was quietened, and so no one spoke about it, except that they were told that they were adopted. And so it was this unvoiced wound that I think where you somehow just have this feeling of being different and not quite belonging. And all of us know that belonging is a primitive, wired need that we all have, the sense of I'm part of this group and I'm seen and allowed to be who I am. And however I am, I'm loved for who I am. And I think there's something in adoption that blocks that. Recently, I've worked with families where they've adopted in the last few years, and how, from Quorum Foundation and other organisations, Adoption UK, that has really changed now, so that the birth mothers or families have a story that is made in a kind of they can do it through photographs or narrative, and the family I was working with recently, who is in my second book actually, This Too Shall Pass, they got lots of objects that represented their mum, so that they would talk about the birth mother. So, I mean, one of the things I really think powerfully is the story we tell ourselves, the narrative that we have, is the person we become. And so if we know the full story, and we kind of can make sense of the full story, however difficult that story is, we have an immense psychological capacity to find a way of living with it. I think what is unknown, we make up. And what we make up haunts us, and we can make it every kind of bad story. And I think that's what happens with adoptive families.
I'll take a few more from the floor, and then we'll go online. Keely, did you have a question?
Earlier, Julie, you were talking about children forming attachment types when they're young in their families. Do you in your work, have you worked with separate families that have separated when the children are quite young? like sort of in specifics where the parents are quite different? Like, what impact does that have, would you think, on the attachment types they form?
I mean, we know from research, and I'm sure you've seen it in families, the biggest predictor of outcomes in families that are separated is the parental relationship. So if the parents really fight and use the children as weapons, or have huge battles about money and sharing and all of that, children do very badly. But children where the families work really hard, where the separating parents work hard to form good enough attachment and to allow maybe I can't remember the numbers now. It's in every family, actually. I worked with a family where they were separated. So I did know a stat about how many families are blended families now. But it's growing. I mean, there's a huge number of blended families. And again, I think the more we kind of recognize how we form attachments, how we communicate, and how in blended families you can have second-class citizens without even realizing it by small things. I remember working with a man who he would go and stay with his dad and his stepmom, and he was never given his own duvet cover. And that sounds like a small thing, but his half-brothers had their own football or whatever it was, duvet covers. And so that gave him the message, I don't count, I'm less important. So I think it's these often small things that have such enormous impact on the identity of who I am I loved, am I seen, am I allowed, am I of worth, am I lovable? Those are the things that I think can get missed. Hi?
Where are you? Who was it?
Oh gosh, that's loud. Following on from an earlier question, I'm working with children in care, and so their experience of family largely becomes the professional network around them. Yeah. So social workers, foster carers, residential workers. How, because I think there's a barrier for professionals to demonstrate love to children, how would you recommend professionals incorporate love into their practice, I guess, with children? Like, how could that look?
Gosh, I mean, we kind of know that in families that love in abundance is what matters, and that love comes in many forms, doesn't it? It comes in action, like moving forward. It comes in being able to step back. It comes in being able to step aside. It comes in so many different forms. And I think with professionals, so on my podcast the other day, I interviewed a woman called Azaria, who 2 of her children were taken away from her. She was in care. Her children were put in care. And there was one person who changed her life. And she was a social worker who didn't put labels on her, but wanted to know her story. So she really looked at what had happened to Azaria. Her dad had been in jail, her mum was a drug addict, and didn't kind of label her with you're dysfunctional, you've got to stop taking drugs, you're a bad mum. She listened to her. And I think the best form of loving for professionals is listening, taking it in and paying attention and responding to what they've heard and not from the assumptions and labels that are in the pack that they're given.
Okay, we have a couple of questions online. If you have asked a question online and would like to...
I want to know what they ate for their dinner.
Yes. You can raise a hand and we can actually hear you.
Are you drinking wine? Are you in your pajamas?
We actually have a nice comment from Kate, who says, not a question, just a reassurance that everything you've spoken of resonates loudly for me. No sticking out of tongue, but plenty of smiles and a few tears here.
Thank you.
Somebody said, would it be possible to please expand on the family boundaries as a touchstone?
Boundaries, yes. So boundaries, I think, come in many different forms. There's interpersonal boundaries and there's space boundaries, and there's like, don't take my stuff. And I think we need to be much clearer about where our limits are. I think we need to be clearer as therapists, but in families, I think we need to be explicit about boundaries, about, I think when we're trying to love as parents, we can step over boundaries and step into stuff trying to sort our child's life out. And so I think you need to be clear about the limits of what you can do and the limits of where you say no. Because otherwise, how can a child learn to be to have agency? And how do they learn to have a no? And I think no's are really important, because what is your yes worth if you don't have a no? And I think, again, this thing of modeling behavior. So modeling a behavior as a mum or a dad of what your limits are. No, I'm not going to do 3 types of cooking because you're a vegan. I'm only going to do 1 meal. Whatever that is, I have limits. I think that is incredibly important in families.
Thank you. And I have another one. How should we take care of those angels in our families that put the needs of others in front of their own as a distraction from attending to their own struggles?
I mean, that's so interesting, isn't it? I think there are angels who give, and there are angels who do it because they don't want to look at themselves. And maybe all of us have a bit of both. And I think really it's about, I mean, the research shows that we get a lot more than we give when we are helping others. So that volunteer work, our kind of work, altruism, you get much more than you give. We have much better health outcomes because it is good for you helping others. So on the one hand, I think as long as we don't get burnt out and we have boundaries and recognize our limits. But I also think it's from reflection. It's having our own therapy of knowing when you have a good no. It's all of those things about how to take care of ourselves. And I think a lot of it is self-compassion. You know, not to have a shitty committee, not to have this little thing in your head that is criticizing you, but to be as kind to yourself and generous as yourself as you are to others, and developing good habits. And those can be small. You know, 5-minute good habits can have amazingly big outcomes. They make a big difference.
Does anyone else have a question?
Did anyone tell me what they ate for their dinner?
No,
online?
no one came
No
back.
one? And they didn't say whether they were wearing pyjamas?
Not yet.
No, nothing.
Has anyone else got a question before I pass back to Charlie? Oh, one more? Yeah.
Is there a known therapeutical process that kind of stop the contamination of the next generation into this? So, for instance, like working with on a person-centered approach, one-to-one with someone, and then during the therapy, they acknowledge the trauma that was passing through the generations, and I'm just trying to think of other cultures and how you won't be really able to go back to your parents and say, okay, there is a problem here, confront them and use all these touchstones for family, because it's really hard to change old people.
When you can't, I don't think it is about blaming the previous generations. I really believe that all of us are doing the best we can, given who we are and where we've come from. And I think that's such an important kind of lens to have. But I do think that when we do the personal work, as much as I said, I think we've worked too much on the individual, I think you can stop the pattern of trauma passing down by doing the work yourself. So having one-to-one therapy and you with your client working on their trauma, I think releases them not to pass it down to the next generation. And that is curative.
Charlie, do you have a few? One more? Tom, did you have a question?
Oh, well done.
You want a question?
What was it?
Power dynamics.
Oh, power dynamics. Yeah.
But you can elaborate a little bit more.
Okay.
Julia, hi.
Hi.
Really interesting talk. Thanks so much. I just wanted to ask, how do we support individuals and families to make space for relationships that might have been? So I work in eating disorders, and I've come across a few cases of adults who've lost a twin in utero.
Oh, yeah. There's
so
that thing. There's that organisation, the Lone Twin Network. I think we grieve them, and I think they're embodied. So Professor Steptoe, who was the pioneer of IVF, Louise Brown, the first IVF baby, he was the surviving twin of a twin that died. And he said the reason unconsciously he did the work was because he was always in some way looking for his twin. And so when you're doing a genogram and you can see a twin that's died, or, you know, a baby that was born before you, I think it's often marking them with rituals. It's kind of talking about them. It's finding a narrative. And it is grieving them. And I think the more people do that, then there is a release in it. And when people some people don't find out they had a twin that died, and they always felt like something physiologically was missing. And then the minute they learn that it was a twin that died, it sort of makes sense. So again, this idea of the story, the narrative you're told, is the person you become. And when it's the full story, it makes sense. Like, that's the space. And that you can't fill the space because that the twin isn't there, but you can begin to have an understanding of why that space. It's not you going mad.
Julie.
Hi.
It was just on the back of what he just said. There's a book by John Bradshaw, I think it's called Family Secrets, which says something really similar to what you were saying, where there was a boy who, at 21, kept trying to commit suicide, but nothing that he was aware of was wrong with him in his life. And what happened was, when he was a baby, his father, at the same age, had committed suicide, but he had never been told.
Oh.
So until that started,
He was acting it out.
He was acting it out, and nobody had told him, and that's where it stops.
Oh.
So I think it's really interesting. The other comment I wanted to make was about families and not saying and not speaking. I noticed that with my own mother, born around, I don't know, she tells everybody she's 81, but she's about 89.
Starting with a lie, like.
But I know she went through, like, you know, born in India, she went through the whole partition, she went through all
yeah.
But they never,
Ever talk about it.
Ever talk about it. She's very happy, she's very bubbly, but you can't have that conversation with her. I don't know the stories. My dad was very similar, didn't have to go through it, but you just wouldn't hear the stories. And what I noticed within my family was I was the one that made sure that I felt everything for everybody, which was interesting.
That is
why
interesting.
I do the work that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I think is important, and I think I very much relate with what you said. It's about, for me, it's always been about truth and honesty in emotion, regardless of right, wrong, good, bad.
Yeah.
It's that honesty and that truth, I think is just so important.
Powerful.
It really is.
Because you feel it viscerally, isn't it? It's when your mind and your body and everything comes together in one, then you feel safe.
Absolutely.
It's like, it's very grounding. I can deal with this. What I can't deal with is trying to make it out in my head.
Absolutely.
Like, overthinking can drive you completely nuts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you. Are we done, everyone?
Oh, someone's raised their hand. Who is it? Graham.
Hello,
Graham, you can talk if you want.
Ooh, okay.
We can hear you. Can we? Oh, I can hear something. What did you have for dinner? Sorry, Graham, you might have to say that again.
Can you hear?
He's had a lot of wine for dinner. I'll pass it to Charlie.
All right, sorry, Graham. For the interest of the people who are online, I think we should let them go. Let's have a huge thank you to Julia. I thought that was brilliant. So are you able to hang around for a bit if people want to grab questions? So Julia's able to, for those who are here, you can grab Julia, talk to her. There's obviously some drinks and there's some books and some T-shirts, etc. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for staying. I mean, the content was awesome, right? Thank you so much for your honesty and your questions as well. I thought actually it was a really powerful session. So thank you, everyone. Thank you.